Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit more about the relationship between these three systems. Well, it's the same system, but these three. You have in the center, we've got the digrams. I think it's pronounced xixiang, something like that. And then we got the prenatal, and then we got the postnatal. And we have this cycle where things are going around and around. And the question is there a correspondence? And I've mentioned before that I think that between the pre and the post, there's some good reason to think that when you're in one of these states of mind, in the postnatal, what's really going on in the world is what's happening in the prenatal. And so it occurred to me, is there a way in which we might think of it even more fundamentally, that these states of mind are in some way or another related to the overall condition between observer and observed, which is what I am claiming as the most likely or a nice, elegant way of describing what this little unit here is about. So, to recap, we might say, parity between observer and observed, and I'm denoting the top line to be the observer. And the bottom line to be, I think phenomena is a good word. Because that's fundamentally what's going on here, right? What's going on in the existence that we're experiencing is that we are an observer and there is phenomena that we're, observing is a very detached term. Experiencing, right? So maybe experiencer is even better, but some people will say, well, that's not a word, but clearly it's a word. There it is, experiencer, and the phenomena being experienced. And this one suggests that there's parity between the two. You might say that this one is disparity. Nice way of putting it. The experiencer has lost their understanding, although the phenomena is still providing. Right? In this one, both experiencer and phenomena are at a loss. There's just no... disparity means that there's still something working. The people who are wealthy, for instance, if we're going to talk about it in economic terms, well, they've got a great experience of what's going on, right? But not the rest, right? So there's a kind of lack of understanding of what that fundamentally means. What it means is that the thing is deteriorating and that ultimately it ends up to a point where, well, money isn't worth anything anymore, so we're all leveled in a state of absolute poverty and chaos and war. Or if the natural world falls apart, it's the great leveling, right? And then we'd have to get our heads back together, even though everything was all screwed up, right? So the phenomena is still dissipating, you could say. If you remember the basic unit, yin and yang, yin we think of as focal point, right? I say attention of the mind is yang, the solid, firm line is bringing things together, creating order, right? Yin is dissipating. It's not necessarily bad, right? You have to have the two, but it's an excess, I guess, of one or the other. And although this, we could say that this situation of parity is the ideal state, well, ideal state, when has that ever been attained? So is it real? I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's impossible that there might not be heaven on earth, or that at some point or another in history there wasn't. If you take a look at the yugas, the ideas within the ancient Vedic tradition and the Hindus, this kind of deep time concept of cycles, that there's a golden age. I mean, maybe. We don't know. It seems possible. At any rate, so the question that I was wondering is whether or not there is a correspondence. So, for instance, let's say we're in this situation down here where it's like, the easiest way of describing it is hell, right? Where there's a lack of understanding and there's a kind of screwed up situation where things aren't holding together. Well, think about what happens to the people who are attached to the material, which of course is what the postnatal is about, right? So if we're just going to think about postnatal, the most common sense of what's happening there is the experience of it. Just the maddening prison, war camp, all the kind, like the worst situations you can imagine. Part of it is this just relentless sensation without any ability to really get beyond that. You're just continually being traumatized by experience. So it's like this, it's like being tortured, right? It's just pure sensation. And, we have to note, of course, this is called the abysmal water, right? This one here. So it's this pure sensation, only the present moment being experienced. You can't really, the luxury of thinking beyond that is outside of all possibility. And the neighbors to this also make sense in the context because, of course, these are transitions. If we're thinking about the cyclical motion going around and around, right? The four phases are the four phases, but there are, patterns of thought that might be transitions between these phases. And so after this experience, the sense of what happened to you, remember in this case, this is mountain here. Even though it looks like the same one in the prenatal, it's actually heading the opposite way. So in this case, this is the bottom line. That's the bottom line. But in this case, this yin line here is actually the bottom line. It gets a little confusing, but, if you just, it's not as confusing as a lot of other things. So this is mountain out here, and it has to do with memory. We just have that firm line at the top. So certainly, memory gets engraved when you're experiencing incredibly intense stuff. And if you take the material existence as being real, well, then that's fundamentally what you're feeling, like this kind of people who can't escape history, right? What happens? The experience of the hardship is engraved upon them, and who can blame them, right? There is the mindset preceding that, which I think is kind of a traumatic event in the context of the postnatal. There's a certain trauma to change for people who are attached to the material because you want things to be the way you want them to be, which is why we have desire here at the top, right? Which is why the fire burns and it's the thing which lights the way. We're trying to connect the past and the future, right? Maintain the body. That desire for life is the most basic of this mindset, you could say. It's very elemental within all living things. And so it has to do with what we want. And we're accustomed to the things that we want, if we're lucky. There's a deep connection to food, for instance, the kind of food that we're used to, if we're lucky enough to eat. But, of course, if you can't eat, then all of this is moot. And this is the top part of the cycle anyway, right? So I'm saying that there's some kind of a correlation between this state of mind and this state of relationship between the experiencer and phenomena. If we're in relatively good times where the world's holding together, then these desires are on some level attainable, or at least, the continuation of life is, right? And we can possess some of the things that we want, even if they don't fully satisfy, which is what this implies, right? It doesn't quite do the trick. It's not as super awesome as we thought it was, right? It might be awesome for a moment, but maybe there's some indigestion involved. It just doesn't quite fully, there's all sorts of byproducts to the pursuit and attainment of desires, right? But when something totally new happens, this is the creative, right? This is like a shocker. So those of us who are accustomed to things being a certain way, on the way down, when all sorts of new stuff starts to happen, is that ringing any bells right now? All sorts of stuff. It suggests that we might be heading into a pretty rough spot, right? That makes a lot of sense. Like, okay, how would we analyze this? Let's say we're just going to talk about this one right here. I don't have a name for these, and maybe I'll have to come up with a name for the 4 phases that, because calling it, I know that in the original document I called it Taiyang. This would be Taiyang. This is Shaoyang. This is Taiyin. Shaoyin. I don't know. That doesn't really do it for me. I think it's kind of a misapplication. And particularly if we're going to think of it in this model, experiencer and phenomena. I like parity for this one. Let's call it parity. Just for fun. Let's try it. See what happens. So, if this is parity, then let's call this one in disparity. And then I think it's fair to call this chaos down here. And the first thing that comes to mind for me over here is hope. And I don't know if that's a good word for it. But I'll put it here for now. Maybe I'll think of something better. Because, if the experiencer has an idea and the phenomena is not yet quite responding to it, we don't know which of those ideas are really going to work. Right? So the experiencer is trying to figure out, how do I clean up this mess? So, and you have to have hope, that some idea, whatever it is that you're working on, it might be the one, it may or may not be, ultimately. But you have to have that hope in order to really dedicate yourself to it. So I think that that's not a bad way of describing it. Of course, this is the rising side, right? So there's something hopeful about rising. And then we notice even in the prenatal, here's thunder, right? And thunder is, of course, thinking about the future, right? Mind is placed on the future. So hope is really kind of a nice way of framing that. And then there is this sense of, okay, let's say you have an idea about how to put shit back together, right? Well, wind is really like perseverance. So you get the idea and you persevere. And hopefully you're able to take your existence and send it into the future again. Right? Even though it's ultimately futile, right? And disparity happens again, and quite often it's on the basis of people enjoying whatever it was that got built up. So that's the lake, right? The lake, the joyous lake. It's the future and the present without concern for the past, in a certain sense, like without the lessons of the past. Which is why partying is called dissolute. Dissolute means it's dissolving. Things are not holding together because it's within the basic category here, right? The mind has not really understood the situation, what it takes to hold things together. Instead, it's just like, oh yeah, well, things are okay, so whatever, let's just have a party. That's the postnatal version of the diagram pattern. Right? Let's think about, what does this mean in terms of the prenatal? If somehow or another, by some incredible force of will and determination of practice, or just spiritual predisposition, or whatever it is, when things are really screwed up, you're in a state of chaos, right? Instead of suffering with the abysmal water, right? With that just pure present sensation, What does it mean to abide in emptiness? I think about that Buddhist monk who lit himself on fire in the Vietnam War. It's been done, since then, and apparently it's happened in the past as well. He sat there through it, right? So his mind could not possibly have been in this state here. Because connecting to the physical sensation, to the present moment with the mind would be hell, right? The only way must have been something like emptiness, abiding within emptiness, within not knowing, and connecting to the source that arises as a result of that emptiness, which would provide the strength, right, to endure that. What are the neighbors here? Well, here we have mountain, and here we have thunder. You don't have to self-immolate, right? If you're one of the people who's in a horrible situation, there's a lot of different levels of that, of course. But if you're able to find this peace, then on the way out of it, there is this sense of some potential future. And even I think for the person who self-sacrifices in the way that monk did, they must be doing it because they believe that would actually produce a better future. So it would be the natural progression there. What does one look to prior to entering this state of emptiness? If you know you're heading into this kind of low period of civilization, well, you look to the lessons of the past and understanding of the actual conditions, which of course is what the past is. The past is everything that's happened right before now. Right now, right? That's the condition we're living in. Everything that happened right before now. So your understanding of everything that happened right before now is what prepares you for the circumstance that you're in. So this seems like it makes sense as a spiritual strategy for coping with this particular phase of the overall cycle relationship between experiencer and phenomena. If you're going to think of it in evolutionary terms, we might call it consciousness and energy. Rise and fall of civilizations, rise and fall of different social movements, you name it. When everything is holding together, then what do? Well, you praise God. What else is there to do? Baruch Hashem, thank God, everything is working out. Things are good, right? Everyone's got enough to eat. We're not destroying the planet. Things are looking good. So it's all holding together. What more need you do? What are the near neighbors of that? Let's think about hope for a second here now. Thunder is just the idea of something in the future. There is nothing happening here in the present. It's just an idea. So here is connecting past and future. And notice that it's not through our will, right? Because in the postnatal, the thing that leads to fire is wind. And wind is present and past, right? You're connecting present and past. And recall, these two are not the same, right? They look like they're the same, but they're the opposite way. This is the bottom line. This is the bottom line, right? So this is wind. This is lake. Here's our middle line, always the same, right? And here's the top line. Top line is past. So past and present are working together. What does that mean? It means that you had an idea in the past and you're doing it. It means there was something that you sort of set out to. It's perseverance is a really nice way of putting it. That's why they call it penetrating, the penetrating wind, right? Sometimes it's called the gentle wind because it doesn't change. You're kind of sticking with the same program. But it's perseverance. And that's what leads to fire here in the case of the prenatal. So it's your doing, right, is connecting the past and the future. That's not what happens in the prenatal. Fire comes right out of thunder. There's just an idea. When it's the right idea, when it is correct, it connects with the past automatically. We don't have to do anything. There's no action, right? No present involved. When does the present get involved? Well, it moves very naturally. Here's lake. Future, present. It's not up to us to come up with an idea. Our mind is just simply, future, present. Future, present. It's not thinking, I had this idea, I'm going to stick to it, right? No, you look to nature to tell you, maybe it's this way. Oh. Postnatal, you're kind of going like, I remember, right? I remember what it was that I was doing, right? Maybe I can do that in the future. Okay, busy. Let's do that again, right? Let's make it happen. Got to make it happen, right? This is kind of hubris, right? This is what some of the ancient texts talk about when they're saying things like the arrogance of the goal of humankind, where it's by the ideas of humankind that people are taking action. As opposed to looking to nature for the guide in a certain sense, looking to the creation, I think is a nicer word, although I know that stirs a lot of problems with people. So yeah, that makes sense that you would have hope when there is this connection, right? Because all kinds of ideas can come up about what the future might bring. And as soon as something kind of pops with the past, well, yeah, you'd have hope, right? Maybe I am getting my mind together and something could be done about the phenomena, right? Let's bring this here because that's what I'm talking about. And then particularly, it's like, okay, so let's stay with that future idea. It's not my idea. It's just that, it occurred. It occurred. There was some kind of a sense of it popping with how things have been, right? So now I'm going to just follow. It's following instead of leading, really, I think is what we're talking about here. And then, of course, you'll know when the day comes, right? Things have been restored. And I think that, arriving to that, there is a certain sense of sadness because it's going to kind of be over. Because ultimately, it's always this pattern of going around and around. So it's like, yeah, okay, well, yes. This also, too, will just be a thing of the past, even though it's happening now. So you're letting go of that future sense of things, which is completely appropriate now that it's actually risen to its apex, because it will have to, at some point or another, kind of start to disintegrate. And connecting with water here, there is that sense of, but things have to be washed away. Yeah, right? And go down the drain into the dustbin of history, you could say, which is kind of that there. The dustbin of history, just the memory of it. And it is that emptiness in a state, unfavorable state of chaos, not what one would wish for, but that's okay. Because knowing that it's inevitable, you don't need to have that sense of anxiety about it. You can stay relatively empty within that, God willing. Okay, I think that covers most everything. I hope you found it interesting, and I look forward to hearing from anyone who has something to say about it. If you want to support these efforts, please go to the video description. There'll be a bunch of links there and all that stuff. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.